Welcome everyone. In this video I'm going to go through all 4 challenges from my functions tutorial. So all of these challenges are quite similar to the challenges on subroutines, and that's intentional. The reason is because I want to show you the difference between how subroutines and functions work. So if I get you to do the same thing with a subroutine and the same thing with a function, you'll get to see the differences quite well. So the first one is very similar to the adding 3 numbers together. It's adding 2 numbers together, so instead of adding 2 numbers, we're going to add 3 numbers together. Now I did actually delete this. This is the same, all of these are the same subroutines from the previous one. All I'm going to do is I'm just going to change them slightly. Now I did delete my add numbers one, so this one was finding the so add array. I'm going to change this to the average array in a second. So we're going to call this average array. There we go. So for the add numbers, we're going to create a new subroutine called static void add nums. This is going to take 3 numbers. So we're going to take int num1, int num2, and int num3. Now right now this is a subroutine. So to change it into a function, we're going to need to decide what type of variable it's going to return. Well, it's going to add 3 numbers together, so it's going to return a number as well. It's going to return an integer. So I'm going to change that void into an int. It's going to have a red underline. It's because we haven't given it a return value. A function requires a term value, and it's going to give you this red underline until you give it the return value. So we're going to say int answer, start it at 0, and then immediately we're going to return the answer just so it gets rid of that red underline. And in between that, let's add all the numbers together. So num1 plus num2 plus num3. And there we have it. So this is my add 3 nums function. So the main difference is I'm not printing it out to the screen, I'm returning the answer to the screen. Let's get rid of these a second. We'll get rid of this one and we'll get rid of this one. Let's get rid of all of this. And we'll call the add number function, and we'll add 1 and 2 and 3. So I showed you this in the tutorial video. I will show you again. If you try to run this, nothing's going to happen. The reason is because we haven't told the computer to print anything out. So you can imagine this add number call here is a variable that can be used in console.writeLines. You can use it to add other stuff together. So it's going to hold the value of this return answer right here. So put simply, if we put console.writeLine, it will now print to the screen the value of the return answer. So if we run that now, 1, 2, 3 makes 6. So if you wanted to store that in somewhere else, so let's say my nums, we'll create another variable called my nums, and that can contain the result of the answer return. So the answer return is going to be placed into the my nums. So you can say my nums, there we go, and that will make 6 as well. You can even do them in sums. So if I wanted to say add 3 to this, so what's going to appear onto the screen? We've got the add number, which is 1, 2, 3, and it's going to return the answer there. Then we're saying plus 3, and we're placing that result into my num. So what's going to be placed out onto the screen? So if you said 9, then you are correct. So they're quite flexible functions. Rule of thumb is if you can do it in a function, do it in a function instead. Obviously some subroutines you don't need to do it, you don't need to make functions because it's not returning a value. But if you want a function to do something that gives you a output, then make it a function, not a subroutine. And the reason is, let's say you're working in a group of people and your boss says, oh, can you create me an array? Can you create me a function that adds everything in an array together? And you give him this, so you given this one that I've written, which writes the answer to the screen. It writes the output to the screen. They're not going to be very happy with you because they wanted to use that average of the array somewhere else. So they wanted the average to do something completely different. They didn't want it to write to the screen. They just wanted a function that worked out the average in an array. If you give them a function, they can do lots of different things with it. They can put it into a variable, they can write it to the screen, or they can store it somewhere else without having you mess it up by doing very specific commands that they didn't want to happen. So let's do the average of the array here. Let's turn this into a function as well, because that is challenge 2. I want to return the average of an array. So this one already adds up all the numbers together. So what we're going to do is we're going to add one more line that says let's call this answer average. No, we're going to keep it as answer, but we're going to call this total. So we're going to call this total, get rid of this, we don't need this. And we're going to have a second variable called int average. And we're going to say that is equal to the total divided by the length of the array. So now we have the average. What are we returning here? We are also returning an integer. So let's change the void to a int, and we're going to return the average. So now we have a function that will return the average of an array. So let's create an array called nums. So what can I call this? Int nums, let's just call them nums, equals new int, curly brackets, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There you go, that'll do. I can send that nums into the average array. Notice that if I do a call to this function and that call does not contain the required amount of parameters, it will do a red underline. So I'm going to place the array in here, and we will store that in another variable called average, and we'll write that average out. So you can see I have a lot more flexibility of how I present or use whatever I want this function to do. And there we go. So that works fine. Next one, find the maximum value. So we've already done this in this function here. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of this. So we've already got the find highest. So there's not much we need to do. It is returning an integer again. So I'm going to change this to an integer. And instead of writing highest out, we're going to return the highest instead. So if I was to send that array into the find highest and output that into highest, so just to clarify what's happening, I'm calling the function find max, sending the array into the function as a parameter, then placing the result of this return value into this variable here, and then printing out the variable on line 17. So it's calling line 16, then line 34, 35, 37, 39, 42. Once it goes to line 42, it's going to go back up to line 16, finish line 16, and then go on to line 17, which will print out the highest, which is 5. And finally is the same one again, but with username. So it's going to return a username. We've already done this. So let's change this. If we would like to return the username, we are going to need to change this void to a string. And instead of writing the username out to the screen, we're going to change this to a return username. And just like before, if I was to call this function and place in 2 names, so let's use the names here. So William Riker, if you get that reference, then I'm happy. William, and the second name is Riker. So I do need to separate the two parameters with a comma. So you do need to do them in the same order as the parameters in the function. So you can see I'm expecting a first name for this one and a surname for this one. So that would make the first variable being placed here going to first name, the second variable going to surname, separated by a comma. And yes, you can mix and match. So if I was to say, if I wanted for whatever reason, let's say I wanted his age as well for some reason, so I could say also add the age, add after another comma. If I do it the wrong way around, so let's say I say 35 and then Riker, so I'm expecting a string, and an integer. I've given them a string, an integer, and a string. It doesn't like that. Can you see 35? It's not a string, so it's given a red underline. Riker is not an integer, so it's given a red underline. So you have to do them in the same order as the order you've got the parameters there. So we don't actually need this 35. Let's get rid of that. Run the code, and we're not actually printing out to the screen, so we'll do a console.write line to print out the result of the return value. And we're going to spell write line correctly. There we go. And there. The username is Wirik. So I hope you found that useful. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. If you like this video, give this video a like and consider tapping that subscribe button. And I will see you guys next time.